Prince Harry is reportedly in total shock, and the reason why is not just personal, it's explosive, it's historical, and it threatens to rip apart a story the world thought it already understood. Everything begins with a silence that lasted far too long, because when a man like Trevor Engelson chooses not to speak for over a decade, that silence becomes louder than any interview, louder than any headline, louder than any carefully managed narrative. And now that silence is breaking, not slowly, not cautiously, but all at once. Let that sink in. This is not just another voice entering the chaos. This is the man who knew Meghan Markle before the titles, before the reinvention, before the carefully curated global identity. The man who saw the raw version of the story, unfiltered, unpolished, and untouched by the machinery of fame. And according to whispers building behind closed doors, he is done protecting that version. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. Why now? Why after 10 years of complete disciplined silence? Why would a successful Hollywood producer with a thriving life suddenly risk stepping into one of the most volatile public narratives of modern times? The answer, insiders suggest, is not revenge. It's not money. It's something far more dangerous, the slow erasure of truth. Because over those 10 years, something strange happened. A story evolved. A past was softened. Certain chapters disappeared entirely, and in that transformation, one figure was quietly written out. The man who was there at the beginning. The man who, by every account, helped build the foundation before the world ever started watching. That kind of erasure doesn't just fade away. It builds pressure, and pressure eventually explodes. And when it does, it doesn't just shake one person. It shakes everything. Let's go back to the moment that insiders still whisper about, the moment that set the tone for everything that followed. 2013. A marriage that, on the surface, looked stable. A partnership that had survived the early struggles of ambition, auditions, and uncertainty. But behind the scenes, something was shifting. Quietly, strategically, almost invisibly. Then came the ending. Not a conversation, not a confrontation, not even a goodbye. A package. Delivered. Cold. Clinical. Final. Inside, wedding and engagement rings. No explanation. No closure. Just a message so silent it was deafening. And that single act, that one decision, has become one of the most quietly revealing details in this entire story. Because how someone ends something tells you everything about how they see it. And here's where the pattern begins to emerge. Because as that chapter closed, another one was already being written. New circles, new connections, a different social orbit. Insiders from those Toronto years described something that didn't feel accidental. It felt like movement. Deliberate movement, strategic alignment, a gradual shift away from the past and towards something bigger, something more powerful, something with access to influence, access to status, access to a world far beyond cable television. And right at the center of that world, Prince Harry. Now here's where things stop feeling like coincidence and start feeling like design. Because while the public was told a story of chance, a blind date, a spark, a connection built on pure human chemistry, whispers from those earlier years suggest something far more calculated, something studied, something intentional, a vision, not vague, not abstract, specific. And if those whispers are even partially true, then the love story that captivated millions may not have started the way it was presented. It may have been guided, positioned, engineered in ways that are only now beginning to surface. And this is exactly where Trevor becomes dangerous, because he wasn't watching from the outside. He was there before the transformation. Before the narrative was refined, before the public version replaced the private reality. He holds the timeline, and timelines don't lie. Now think about what that means to Harry, because according to sources, his reaction is not anger, it's not denial, it's something far more revealing. It's shock, not the kind you perform in public, the kind that settles in quietly, the kind that forces you to replay every moment, every conversation, every decision, wondering what was real and what was something else entirely. Because if the foundation shifts, everything built on top of it starts to feel unstable. And insiders are describing something else too. Distance, not dramatic, not explosive, but gradual. Separate routines, separate focuses. A life that no longer moves in perfect alignment. Not officially broken, but no longer seamlessly united either. And then there's the silence from outside. The allies who once stood loud and visible, quiet. The support system that once amplified the narrative, fading. One by one, voices that used to defend are choosing not to speak at all. That kind of silence doesn't happen by accident. It happens when people start asking questions they're not sure they want answered. And those questions are all pointing toward one thing: Trevor's next move. Because this isn't just about a man telling his story. It's about timing. It's about credibility built through years of saying nothing. And it's about what happens when that silence finally breaks with receipts, with timelines, with details that can't be easily dismissed. And if even a fraction of what insiders are hinting at becomes public, the story doesn't just change, it fractures. And right now, behind closed doors, there's one question echoing louder than all the rest. What exactly does Trevor know, and how much of it is he ready to reveal? Because once that question is asked out loud, it doesn't go away, it multiplies, it deepens, it starts connecting pieces that were never meant to be connected, and suddenly the entire narrative that once felt solid begins to feel like something far more fragile. And this is where the story moves from uncomfortable to potentially explosive. Because what Trevor Engelson is rumored to be holding is not just memories, it's documentation, it's timelines, it's the kind of detail that doesn't rely on interpretation, it forces confrontation. And that's exactly why behind the scenes there is reportedly a level of urgency that has not been seen before. Legal teams moving, conversations happening late at night, strategies being drafted not to win a narrative but to contain one. Because here's the truth that no one can ignore anymore. Trevor doesn't need to exaggerate, he doesn't need to speculate, he doesn't need to spin. He was there, he lived it, and most critically of all, there was no protection put in place to stop him from speaking. No carefully constructed legal barriers, no agreements anticipating that one day this man might hold the most dangerous version of the story, the original one. And that is where everything begins to feel irreversible. Because if that version surfaces publicly, it doesn't just challenge the story told by Meghan Markle, it introduces a competing reality, one that predates every interview, every documentary, every carefully worded statement. And when two realities collide, the public does something unpredictable. It doesn't just choose one, it starts questioning both. Now think about what that does to a narrative that was built entirely on emotional trust. Because the power of that narrative was never just in the details, it was in the feeling of authenticity, of truth, of a story that people believed they were witnessing in real time. But the moment doubt enters that space, even slightly, everything changes. And this is exactly where the situation becomes deeply personal for Prince Harry. Because according to insiders, this is no longer about defending a public image. This is about something far more internal. A slow, uncomfortable process of reassessment. A man looking back at the decisions that reshaped his entire life, leaving his family, his role, his country, and quietly asking a question that becomes harder to ignore with every new development. What if the story I believed wasn't the full story? And that question doesn't just sit there. It grows, it reshapes perspective, it reframes memories, and most importantly, it isolates. Because when doubt enters a relationship that was built on absolute certainty, the shift is not loud, it's subtle. It's in the silences, it's in the pauses, it's in the moments where conversations don't go as deep as they used to. And that's exactly what insiders are beginning to describe. Not chaos, not collapse, but distance. A quiet, controlled distance. Separate schedules, separate priorities, appearances that feel coordinated rather than natural. A life that still looks intact from the outside but feels very different behind closed doors. And while that's happening internally, externally something equally significant is unfolding. The support system is thinning. Because the people who once stood firmly in defense, the influential voices, the powerful allies, the figures who amplified and protected the narrative, are no longer stepping forward. And in a world where visibility equals validation, silence becomes its own message. It signals hesitation, it signals uncertainty, and most importantly, it signals risk. Because aligning with a narrative that might soon be challenged by first-hand testimony backed with documentation is not something even the most loyal allies take lightly. And that shift, that quiet withdrawal, is one of the clearest indicators that something bigger is coming. And then there's the public itself. Because for years, the audience followed this story emotionally. They invested in it, they defended it, they debated it. But now, something is changing. The emotional response is slowly being replaced by something colder, more analytical. People are starting to revisit the timeline. They're re-examining the details. They're connecting moments that once felt isolated. And when that happens, the story stops being just a story. It becomes a puzzle. puzzle, and puzzles demand answers. Now here's where the tension reaches its peak, because if Trevor's version is released fully, clearly, without restriction, it doesn't just add another voice to the conversation. It forces a complete recalibration, not just of public perception, but of the entire structure that has supported this narrative for years. And that recalibration has consequences. For Meghan, it means something deeply challenging, losing control of the story. Because for the first time, the version of events being presented doesn't come from her perspective or from observers interpreting from the outside. It comes from someone who was inside at the beginning, before the transformation. And that kind of voice is impossible to fully silence. For Harry, the implications are even more complex, because this is not just about public image, it's about identity. It's about the life he chose, the sacrifices he made, and the belief system that justified those sacrifices. And if that belief system starts to crack, even slightly, it forces a kind of reckoning that cannot be managed with statements or appearances. It has to be faced privately, quietly, and completely. And this is why insiders are describing his reaction not as panic, but as something heavier. Embarrassment, not performative, not strategic, real. Because embarrassment comes from recognition, from the realization that something doesn't align the way it once did. And that realization is often the first step towards something much bigger, a shift. And that shift is what everyone is now watching for. Because when a story reaches this point, it doesn't end quickly. It unfolds slowly, piece by piece, detail by detail, until eventually the version that survives is not the one that was told first, but the one that holds up under pressure. And right now, the pressure is building. The questions are multiplying. The silence is breaking. And somewhere behind all of it, Trevor is still there, still watching, still holding whatever it is he has chosen not to say yet. And that yet is what makes this moment so volatile, because it suggests that what we've seen so far is not the reveal, it's the buildup. And if that's true, then the real story hasn't even started unfolding in full view. It's still coming. And when it arrives, it won't just adjust the narrative. It will force everyone, the public, the media, the people directly involved, to confront a version of events that may look very different from the one they thought they knew. The only question left now is simple and impossible to ignore. When Trevor finally speaks, how much of the truth will actually be left standing?